Hello, welcome to this introductory presentation about the SocialUP project Design Thinking for Sustainable Social Enterprises, co-funded by the Erasmus Programme of the European Union. My name is James Rock. I'm SocialUP project lead, and I'm also managing partner of Design Thinkers in the United Kingdom. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about the project, a little bit about design thinking, and give you some indication of what's inside the design thinking field guide, which has been designed specifically for businesses and enterprises and organizations within the social economy. So, a lot of people ask us to begin with, what exactly is design thinking? I'd like to ask you, think for a moment, do you know what design thinking is? Have you heard of it? Do you practice it? Have you got results from it? Many public, private and third sector businesses have gained innovative new services for their customers using this as a tool. When we did some research as part of this project, we went to a large number of social enterprises, social entrepreneurs, social enterprise support agencies, national agencies, and finally to design thinking experts. So we asked them the question, what is design thinking? Well, first of all, they said it's about thinking like a designer. Designers don't necessarily think like an engineer or like an accountant or a lawyer. They have perhaps a more wide-ranging and open framework which they use within their profession. Some people said it was a way to solve wicked challenges, and we'll talk more about those later. A lot of people understand it's about being human-centered and empathetic as opposed to logical and rational and businesslike. Some people thought it was a process of innovation or a set of visual tools that could be used within that process. Some people identified that it's about co-creation with all the stakeholders involved within a change or an innovation or introduction of new services or changes to services. One of the fundamental aspects is about using prototyping during the process of innovation, and that's to learn quickly and to iterate and develop solutions as we go through the process rather than design a solution, go through an expensive implementation and then find it fails. So let's go on to that thinking different aspect of design thinking. The human brain has two sides, right and left, and a lot of people think that the left side of the brain is about logical, rational, analytical thinking, and the right side of the brain is about creative, playful thinking. Designers tend to develop the right side of their brain, but it's not all about creativity. The right brain also helps us to see the bigger picture, to perhaps frame the wider system in which a problem or a challenge exists. And it helps us to make connections to people and for us to be much more empathetic. Another aspect of design thinking is to ask the question, not what is the problem, but to reframe that and ask what are we trying to accomplish. By doing that, we look at the bigger picture. We don't focus in on the detail as a left brain thinker might. we look broader, we explore what the needs of the users or our customers are trying to do. So let's look at the issue of wicked problems, wicked challenges. Traditional problems are very simple, very easy to address. People look for the solution because it's a singular problem. When we come to wicked challenges, perhaps a good example would be global warming. There are many problems within global warming, and so it consequentially becomes a wicked challenge. And if we were to think about how were we going to solve the challenge of global warming, there are many opportunities, there are many issues, and we would find it impossible to develop a solution that resolves all of those. And so what we have to do is identify which are the key ones which we're going to address. The next element of design thinking is about being human-centered and using that as an approach to innovation. Traditionally, when we've looked at problems, we tend to first of all look at the feasibility of any potential solutions, and very often that comes from the use of technology, for example the internet. And when we look at that feasible solution and we work out that yes, it is feasible, we then have to look at the viability, and this is about the accountants identifying, is this a financially viable solution? Will it develop a return on investment? But in these traditional approaches, perhaps desirability, and that's the human element, has been forgotten. So in design thinking as an approach, we use desirability as the starting point. Moving on to the process model of design thinking, the UK Design Council came up with the double diamond model in about 2007. And this came from some research work where they looked at organizations and businesses that use design to be innovative and to develop new products, new services, and ways to overcome internal challenges. And they discovered that this general process was one of discovery, exploring the problem, the challenge, the issues, defining what the real issues and challenge is, developing ideas through brainstorming approaches and through iterative development, and then delivering it through prototyping, selecting the best solutions, piloting and implementing. And they discovered that this process was one of, to begin with, divergent thinking in the discovery phase, convergent thinking in the define phase, moving back to divergent thinking again as the development of ideas started to happen, and then once focused on which were the best solutions, convergent thinking again to focus on delivery. At the bottom of this page you can see a link to a download for the white paper that was published by the Design Council. In our version of design thinking, there seems to be a general consensus that the double diamond has been expanded, and I think this is our starting point for the SocialUP project, design thinking for sustainable social enterprises. The first part, the first diamond, is about insight gathering and opportunity framing, and we call that the inspiration phase. The second phase is about converting those possibilities of ideas that will respond to the challenges, to the issues, to the problems that have been defined, and coming up with as many possible solutions as possible. And then the third phase is about having a conversation about turning that into reality through taking the best of the ideas, prototyping them, piloting them, implementing them. As you can see, we go through this divergent approach to begin with, looking through a wide-angle lens at all the possible issues that we might find within an ecosystem that we are operating within. And then we take that wide thinking into reframing the question, reframing the challenge, before we go into the ideation phase, which again is very divergent in its approach, and then finally taking it through one of narrowing down the best solutions. And we talked about it being iterative. All the way through the process, we may find issues, comments, feedback from users that takes us back to an earlier stage, and we might have to revisit those earlier stages as part of the process. Even to the extent that sometimes we develop solutions that may not be wanted by users, and we have to go back to the beginning. A lot of people using design thinking start to feel uncomfortable at the early stages, and that's because very often people don't get involved in the early stages. The early stages are where a designer loves to play. We love as designers to explore, to take different routes, to perhaps go down dark alleys that may lead to nowhere, and we have to come back to the beginning. And this insight gathering and opportunity framing is sometimes very uncomfortable to begin with. And as we start to move into the conversation about the possibilities, and we know what the real issue is, we know what the possible solutions are, it starts to feel more comfortable. And then as we get into the implementation phase, then it starts to become very comfortable. So bear this in mind as you go through the process of design thinking, that for the first couple of times perhaps that you use it, this is how it might feel. Now, when we did our inspiration phase talking to social enterprises, support agencies, vocational education trainers, design thinking experts, we started to realize that perhaps a revised design thinking model was required for the SocialUP project. And this was because we got a lot of feedback from social entrepreneurs and startups that they didn't really know how to set up a project like this. So we changed the model slightly, and we, as part of the inspiration phase, we put up front a preparation phase so that people can prepare for the project before they move into the discovery and definition phases and going through to the develop and deliver phases. And the basis of the design thinking field guide is now based on this revised bespoke design thinking model, which was, as I say, built in response to specific needs identified during the research and inspiration phase of our project. This is a very important slide because what it identifies is that as we go through the double diamond model, you can see the 4 sections at the bottom axis there. We can see that it's very easy to change our minds, to change our design at the early phase of a project when we haven't made any investments. And so the cost of change at that stage is very low. However, as we move through the overall process, we can see that the closer we get to delivery, the more difficult it is to change and the more expensive it is to change. And that's because we've made all the investment in designing, developing, prototyping, tooling, and implementing our solution. And so if we fail at the end of a project, it is very, very expensive. So let's go on to tell you a little bit more about the SocialUP project, Design Thinking for Sustainable Social Enterprises. Our inspiration phase resulted in us publishing this report, It's a 60-page document, and it's available free of charge to download if you go to the link at the bottom of the page here. I'm going to go on to tell you a little bit about our key findings. First of all, we discovered that the social economy across Europe is very, very large. It employs something like 11 million people. It's about 6% of EU gross domestic product, and that's about 900 billion euros. So it is very, very significant, and it's growing. And in the UK, we discovered, for example, that about a third or 35% of startups now have a social purpose. We discovered that the public and private sectors are getting involved in social enterprise now, and there seems to be a mashup of these types of organizations with social entrepreneurs developing innovative solutions that bring these different sectors together in partnerships and collaborations and consortiums, and that these consortiums provide both products and services, often within an ecosystem of delivery for customers and users. But we also discovered that social enterprises, why were so many failing at the moment? And we discovered this was because many of them lack an entrepreneurial spirit, and they lack viable business funding, business models, and that they're highly reliant on public funding. And to a great extent, this stems from the type of people that were starting social enterprises, who often come out of the public or the charity third sectors and working with NGOs, and they're not used to being entrepreneurial, and they're not used to identifying entrepreneurial business models. They're used to a publicly funded model or a donation-led model. We also discovered that they're poor at entering new markets because generally they've worked in the market they are embedded within for a long time before setting up as a social enterprise. We also discovered that organizations across the social economy have negligible knowledge of design thinking. Something like 95% of those that we spoke to had no prior knowledge of what design thinking is, what it is used for, how it might be used, and more importantly, what the benefits it might give them are. Design thinking is based on team-based co-creation. Here you can see a pilot workshop that we ran in Bristol in the UK with a small team who were using these tools developed within the SocialUP Design Thinking Field Guide to develop social entrepreneur solutions to societal challenges. It's a room based on creativity. There's plenty of space. People work together. They're not working at the desk. It's a process of creative collaboration where diverse people drawn from within different stakeholder groups, from within different disciplines and areas of expertise are brought together. And so it's a process of seeking out diversity of thought and being very inclusive to everyone within the team. So that's about making room for everyone in the team, and to a great extent the design thinking tools and the process have been designed to actually help that and to facilitate that. One of the aspects of working in creative teams is that everybody gets to be right partially. Not everybody likes working in teams. Sometimes they've been used to being working as an individual, coming up with their own ideas and pushing their own ideas. It's much better to get comfortable with creative abrasion that team working brings, and to identify the best solutions and support and build on those best solutions, rather than try to fight your corner for your own particular solution. And so it's very important that we don't necessarily believe that we should have teams of experts of the same type. Diversity is good. Uniformity tends to restrict the range of possible solutions, the range of ideas, the wideness of thought that we're looking for within human-centered design. And so it's about looking for that creative spark, looking for that idea that will light up everyone else within the team, that will create a fire, that will turn into a bonfire, that will actually have the energy to overcome the challenge and to deliver real effective solutions. So this is about working differently. It's not about necessarily sitting behind a desk and doing desk research and writing reports. It's about activity-led, collaborative working as a team, chipping in, providing your skills where they are appropriate, bringing in other people's skills where they are appropriate, and actually, it's about sprinting towards a finish. And very often these design thinking challenges are run in what are called design sprints, which might be 1 week of dedicated activity with a team, going through the process to try and come up with the best ideas and prototype those ideas, not necessarily coming to the definitive implemented solution. As we go through the design thinking process, this creative collaboration, we find that many of us suffer from fear as a barrier to innovation. We fear being wrong. We fear failure. We fear rejection. And these are fears that are born in us from our experience within society. Within an organization, failure is very often not tolerated. So people don't admit to failure. They don't admit to failure because they feel they might be rejected, even fired. And so our first urge within the process is to try to get over these fears, to understand that by making failures early, that we don't need to be fearful of them. Everybody makes failures. The earlier we make those failures, the less they cost us and the more that we learn from them. So don't be afraid of thinking different. When everybody in the organization is swimming around in the goldfish bowl, sometimes it takes someone with a new idea to jump out of that goldfish bowl, to go and swim alone, to champion new horizons, if you like. Don't be afraid to be different. And I know that can be very, very difficult for some people. And so the organization needs to be cognizant of this and to support thinking different. Another innovation barrier is the frames that we look at challenges and issues through, the spectacles that we wear. It's very often like a kaleidoscope that we had as a child. As we rotate the lens of the kaleidoscope, we see the same shapes in different formations. And this is how we might frame challenges that we are trying to overcome. So to help us, we use framing questions rather than closed questions. We ask, rather than what is the problem, what are we trying to accomplish? we ask how might we, as a way of framing the question about how might we resolve this issue for this user group at this particular time. Another question that we ask is what else? Always ask what else, because when we think we've come to a solution, we can always ask what else could we do? Could we build on the solution that we've got? Could we do it slightly differently? Could we add in something else that would be of value to one of the stakeholders in the stakeholder group? A further barrier in innovation is that of efficiency and time. 95% of innovation within business is focused on building better efficiency. What we're trying to find is better effectiveness. And so don't just think about cost saving, don't just think about saving time, think about how might we develop better solutions. And don't worry so much about the time it takes to find them. It's much better to take a longer period of time to come up with the right solution than to find a suboptimal solution within a specified time frame. However, what we have found during the process of design thinking is that putting people under time constraints can often stimulate creativity. It makes them think faster, it makes them come up with more diverse ideas, and that's good as part of the process. As you saw in the photograph of the co-working team I showed earlier, we use a lot of yellow post-it notes in design thinking, and these are very powerful tools. They allow people to work as individuals, so their voices can be heard. They allow people to work reflectively and to write down their own thoughts and their own ideas before then sharing them on the workshop tools that we have developed. And they are also movable, so when they are on the tools, they can be grouped and collected. And this is a very powerful way of creating buy-in and understanding for the wider group of team members, and for demonstrating to other stakeholders who may not be part of the team but who you may wish to feed back your teamwork later. So it's a very powerful tool. Use large marker pens. Don't write lots of detail, and just use a sufficient amount of description for your ideas and for your suggestions to be able to describe it later. So let's think about the design challenge and the overall toolkit that we're going to look at, and how the fieldwork guide has been developed. The first phase is about preparation, as I mentioned earlier, and for this stage of the project we have come up with a number of tools, challenge cards to give people a better idea about how they might frame the challenge, a stakeholder map for people to organize and to identify who the key stakeholders are and what priority those stakeholders have in the solution that might be developed. We use a challenge framework using a 5W technique: who, what, why, where, when. That allows people as a group to explore the ecosystem that the challenge exists within, and to reframe perhaps what their actual question is, their how might we question. When we know that, we also recognize that people need a broad project plan, a very high level project plan, and we came up with the challenge roadmap as a way of identifying the timescales, the resources required, the stages that the team might have to go through. And we also developed a project success factor map and this helps the team to identify what success will look like, how they will measure success, and will act as a guide as they go through the process. Moving into the discovery phase, well, this first of all is about being human-centered. So we developed the persona map for them to really bring to life and articulate an imaginary user, much like a writer would develop a fictional character within a novel. And this allows them to understand, as a human being, this persona much better. We gave them a context map, which allows you to explore the ecosystem of change of the environment that the challenge is operating within. We developed a research guide which takes a three-stage approach: a desk research, a quantitative research, and a qualitative research. And we found that many early adopters, this was new to them. They had been very used to doing desk-based research, but found it very difficult to go out and interview people in the street, for example. And so we put together a research guide that gives some tips on that. We developed the customer journey map, which allows the team to identify the process that the customer or the user takes through the process that they are, the service that they might be using at the moment. It identifies all the touch points, it identifies what they have to do, what the providing organization has to do. More importantly, it identifies the emotional journey that users and customers go through. Because in this emotional journey, we identify where they're happy, where they are unhappy, and that identifies where there may be opportunities for us to improve the service offering for those customers. And the last tool that we developed that we use here is the Research Affinity Map. And the Research Affinity Map allows us to group together the key issues and identify the biggest issues for us to work on as part of the challenge. So here's where we start to redefine the challenge. We take the results of that Research Affinity Map and we start to develop how might we cards. These are how might we solve the key issues that are identified by the challenge, and we develop vision cards. Vision cards are imaginary solution cards, if you like. What is our vision of a solution for this particular issue? And bringing these together allows us to narrow down which are the key issues, what's the key challenge that we're going to work on. So now we move into the develop phase, and this is about where we start brainstorming. So the first tool we had is a first burst map, which allows us, everybody in the team, to come up with as many solutions as possible that might work to overcome this particular challenge. Sometimes we run out of ideas during brainstorming, so we built in a couple of extra exercises. One is what we call a thinking wrong exercise, and the second is to use a brainwriting exercise. And these give additional ideas to stimulate wider, more creative innovation. We also use a stakeholder value map, which builds on the earlier stakeholder map, but identifies for the key stakeholders what are the value propositions that our solution needs to build on. And then we need to start to narrow down hundreds of ideas to tens of ideas to 2 or 3 ideas perhaps. A way of doing that is to write up idea cards for the best of those ideas, and to start to prioritize on a concept priority map which are the best ones, which ones are the most easy and the most difficult to implement, and which ones will have the biggest impact or the least impact. And by plotting them like that, it allows us to choose the best solutions to take forward. So then we're into the delivery phase, and here we need to bring those best ideas to life. One way we do that is via a storyboard canvas that we developed, and to develop prototypes, and to use prototyping tools of many types. For example, Lego, as a way of building desktop models that might identify and help the teams to tell the story of what their solution is going to do. We use the customer journey map in a slightly different way. We develop a future journey map of what the new process, the new service, the new system that a customer or user might go through. And we also have to help these social enterprises from a business concept. So we develop the social business canvas as a way to develop the business model of a social enterprise. And then once they've been through that, to actually give them a project tool called the concept canvas, which actually gives them the opportunity to frame all the issues, all of the things that they need to do, to identify the priorities, the resources required, the funding required, etc., to bring this concept to reality as a way of pitching to investors, to stakeholders, that this is the way we need to implement this. And in practice, this is what it looks like, co-creation in practice. Here you can see the team, they're starting to develop their storyboard. They've been working on the research phase, the solutions, they know which are the best ideas, and together they're pulling them together and putting them down on paper. Once they've done that, they start to share these ideas, and it gives them a way, this is a way of prototyping, if you like, that allows them to get early feedback. By telling the story, they can get feedback as to whether or not this story works for stakeholders and users. And working in this team environment allows them to collectively challenge each other, challenge the ideas that they've come up with. And when the prototyping is finished, you can see this team here, an international team from 3 different countries here. They've developed their social business canvas behind them, and they've developed a working desktop model using Lego that identifies a solution for a mental health solution social enterprise for students who are suffering from anxiety and stress in their university life. All the way through the process we use something called reflection and feedback as we go through these stages, and we use a simple tool getting people to identify in their post-it notes individually what they liked, what they learned, and what they wished they had done during these activities. And getting them to frame I wish is a positive way of getting them to reframe what they didn't like, but it gets their ideas for how we might improve. So that's about all that I've got to speak to you about. I'll close by giving you the contact details. We have a project website which tells you lots more about the project. We have a Facebook page which is a community that enables you to engage with other users. And finally, the toolkit can be found as a free open source download site with lots of resources in there, and the website link is there. So I'd like to say thank you and good luck with your design thinking.